Eleanor Reeves stared out the tiny oval window as wisps of cloud drifted past the wing. Seat 12F wasn't the most comfortable spot on the plane, but after 3 days of explaining complex physics theories to rooms full of skeptical colleagues, any seat would do. Her eyes felt heavy. The gentle hum of the engines made it all too easy to drift off. "More water, ma'am?" The flight attendant's voice pulled Ellie to her friends, back to the present. She nodded, accepting the plastic cup with a tired smile. The International Physics Conference in Tokyo had been both exciting and draining. Most people there hadn't fully grasped what her research on quantum entanglement really meant. Not that she blamed them. Even after 10 years of work, there were days when the implications scared her a little. "We're expecting some turbulence as we approach the Alaskan coastline." The captain's voice crackled over the speaker. "Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Ellie sipped her water and pulled her notebook from the seat pocket. Old school, her students would tease, but something about putting pen to paper helped her think. The equation she'd been struggling with for months still refused to balance. There was something missing, a connection she couldn't quite see. The first bump was gentle, barely noticeable. The second jolted her pen across the page, leaving an ugly line through her careful notes. By the third, water was sloshing from cups, and overhead bins were rattling. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected weather patterns. Please remain calm and seated with your—" The plane dropped suddenly, like an elevator with cut cables. Oxygen masks fell. A child screamed. Ellie grabbed the mask and pulled it over her face, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd never been afraid of flying before, but as the plane bucked and swayed, she found herself gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. Through the window, dark clouds had replaced the blue sky, occasionally lit by distant lightning. The plane tilted sharply, and Ellie caught sight of the wing flexing in a way that couldn't be normal. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, tighter now. "We need to make an emergency landing. There's a military airfield on Shemya Island that's given us clearance. Please follow all crew instructions." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Ellie's life. The storm tossed the plane like a toy. Rain pelted the windows with such force she thought they might crack. The descent was steep, too steep, and the relief when the wheels finally touched down was overwhelming. As the plane taxied to a stop, Ellie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Outside her window, she could see they weren't at any ordinary airport. Military vehicles lined the runway. Men and women in uniform moved with purpose across the tarmac. "Due to the severe weather conditions," a flight attendant announced, "we'll be staying here until it's safe to continue. Local personnel will assist with temporary accommodations. Please take only essential personal items with you." Ellie grabbed her backpack, tucking her notebook safely inside. The passengers filed out slowly, dazed and relieved to be on solid ground. At the bottom of the stairs, military personnel directed them toward a low concrete building at the edge of the airfield. Rain soaked through Ellie's light jacket in seconds. A young officer checked IDs as they entered the building. When Ellie handed over her passport, something unusual happened. He looked at it, then at her, then back at the passport. His eyes widened slightly. "Dr. Eleanor Reeves?" he asked, voice suddenly formal. "Yes, that's me," she replied, confused by his reaction. It wasn't like she was famous. The officer stepped away and spoke quietly into his radio. Ellie tried to hear what he was saying, but the chatter of confused passengers drowned out his words. When he returned, his entire demeanor had changed. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me, please." "Is something wrong with my passport?" she asked, suddenly worried. "No, ma'am. Everything's in order. If you'll just follow me." People were staring now. The businessman who'd sat in 12E gave her a suspicious look. A mother pulled her child closer as Ellie passed, as if she might be dangerous. "I don't understand," Ellie protested as the officer led her away from the group. "I'm just a physics professor. I'm not at liberty to discuss it here, Dr. Reeves. Lieutenant Chen will explain everything." They walked down a series of corridors, each requiring keycard access. With each door they passed through, Ellie's confusion grew into genuine worry. This wasn't normal procedure for stranded passengers. This was something else entirely. The officer stopped at a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and gestured for her to enter. Inside was a plain room with a metal table and 4 chairs. It looked unsettlingly like an interrogation room from a TV show. "Please wait here, Dr. Reeves. Lieutenant Chen will be with you shortly." The door closed with a solid click. Ellie stood there, her wet clothes dripping onto the concrete floor, wondering what on earth could be happening. She was nobody, just a theoretical physicist from a small university whose work was too complex for most people to care about. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Ellie had moved from confused to angry by the time the door finally opened again. A woman in her 40s entered, followed by 2 men in suits rather than uniforms. The woman introduced herself as Lieutenant Chen. "Dr. Reeves, I apologize for the unusual reception," Lieutenant Chen said, her voice clipped and professional. "Your presence here is unexpected. I was on a commercial flight that got caught in a storm," Ellie replied, trying to keep the irritation from her voice. "Nothing unexpected about bad luck." One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Dr. Reeves, do you recall submitting a paper to the Department of Defense about 10 years ago? A theoretical application of quantum entanglement for secure communications?" The question hit her like a bucket of cold water. That paper, she'd almost forgotten about it. It had been early in her career, a speculative piece that had earned her nothing but a form rejection letter. Yes, it was rejected. They said the practical applications were too limited. The man exchanged glances with his colleagues. "That's not exactly what happened, Dr. Reeves. Your paper wasn't rejected, it was classified." "Classified? That's ridiculous. It was just theory. Thought experiments, really." The second suit opened a folder and slid a document across the table. At the top was a single word stamped in red. "Nightfall." "Dr. Reeves, are you familiar with this designation?" Ellie stared at the paper, then back at the 3 solemn faces watching her. "I've never seen this before in my life." "And yet," said Lieutenant Chen, "it's your code name. Has been for 10 years. Ellie's laugh came out as a nervous bark. "My code name? I don't have a code name. I grade papers and apply for grants that never come through. You've been the unwitting architect of Project Nightfall, Dr. Reeves. And, now by what can only be described as an extraordinary coincidence, you've landed at the very facility where your theories are being put into practice." Ellie sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. This had to be some kind of mistake or a joke, or a dream brought on by airplane food and too many conference presentations. "We need your help," the first suit said simply. "What you started, we've built it. But there's a problem only you can solve." Ellie looked from face to face, searching for signs that this was all an elaborate prank. She found none, just 3 serious expressions waiting for her response. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me what you've done with my work." And just like that, Eleanor Reeves, who had boarded the plane as just another passenger in seat 12F, stepped into a world she never knew existed, a world that apparently had known her name for years. Ellie followed Lieutenant Chen through a maze of corridors, each requiring different security clearances. The walls changed from painted concrete to bare metal as they descended deeper into the facility. The temperature dropped noticeably. Whatever they were about to show her was underground, way underground. "I still don't understand," Ellie said, her voice echoing slightly in the narrow passage. "That paper was just ideas, theoretical applications, nothing practical." The man in the expensive suit, who had introduced himself only as Director Howard, walked beside her. "Sometimes theory is enough, Dr. Reeves. You gave us a roadmap. We've spent 10 years and billions of dollars following it." The thought made Ellie's stomach tighten. Her scribbled equations and late-night thought experiments had been turned into something real, something important enough to hide beneath an Alaskan island. And they'd done it all without telling her. "Why didn't you just hire me?" she asked. "Why the secrecy?" Lieutenant Chen's face remained impassive. "Compartmentalization. The fewer people who knew the full scope of the project, the better. Even, most of the scientists working here only understand their small piece of the puzzle." They reached a final door, heavier than the others with a complex scanning system beside it. Lieutenant Chen placed her palm on a reader and looked into a retinal scanner. The door hissed and slowly swung open. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The room beyond was enormous, easily the size of a football field. Rows of supercomputers lined the walls. In the center stood what looked like the interior of an aircraft cockpit, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Dozens of people in lab coats and military uniforms moved purposefully through the space. "Welcome to Nightfall," Director Howard said quietly. Ellie stepped forward, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. One wall displayed complex equations. Her equations, but expanded, developed far beyond what she'd originally written. Another showed what looked like flight trajectories and communication patterns. "You actually built it," she whispered. "You made quantum entanglement work for communications." A woman in a lab coat approached, her face tight with stress. "Not exactly, Dr. Reeves. That's why you're here." She extended her hand. "Dr. Lynn Patel, lead engineer. Your work has been the foundation of everything we've done, but we've hit a wall." Director Howard gestured toward a conference room off to the side of the main floor. "Let's brief Dr. Reeves properly." Inside the smaller room, Ellie found herself facing a table covered with technical documents and computer models. A large screen on the wall showed what looked like test flight data. Dr. Patel tapped a few keys on her laptop, and a 3D model appeared on the screen. "This is what we built from your theories. A quantum communication system that can't be intercepted, jammed, or decoded. It would revolutionize military communications." "Would?" Ellie asked, catching the conditional tone. Lieutenant Chen's expression darkened. "It worked in lab conditions. It even worked in limited field tests, but when we integrated it into the F-22 platform for actual combat simulations..." She nodded to Dr. Patel. The engineer pulled up video footage showing an F-22 fighter jet in flight. Everything seemed normal until the plane suddenly lost control, spiraling toward the ground before the pilot managed to recover at the last moment. "The system creates some kind of feedback loop during high-stress maneuvers," Dr. Patel explained. "We lose control of all communications, navigation, sometimes even flight controls." "Has anyone been hurt?" Ellie asked, horrified at the thought. "2 pilots injured, none killed," Lieutenant Chen said flatly. "We've suspended full integration tests, but we're running out of time." Director Howard slid a folder across the table. Inside were satellite images of what looked like another military base, but with Chinese markings. "Our intelligence indicates that China has developed something similar. They're working from different theoretical principles, but they're closing in on the same goal. We believe they're weeks away from full deployment. If they succeed and we don't..." He didn't need to finish. Ellie understood the implications. Whoever controlled this technology first would have an unimaginable military advantage. "I'm not a military scientist," Ellie said quietly. "I don't work on weapons." "This isn't a weapon, Dr. Reeves," Dr. Patel countered. "It's a communication system. It can save lives by ensuring our pilots always have contact with command, even in hostile electronic environments." Ellie paged through the technical documents, her mind already racing to understand what they'd built. "You've modified my original approach," she noted. "The quantum pairing is more aggressive than I would have suggested." Dr. Patel nodded. "We needed stronger entanglement to maintain the connection at extreme distances." A realization dawned on Ellie. "That's likely your problem. You're forcing too many particles into entanglement. The system is probably collapsing under its own complexity." The room fell silent as the implication of her words sank in. 10 years of work, billions of dollars spent, and they might have missed something fundamental from the beginning. "How long would it take to redesign?" Lieutenant Chen asked. Ellie looked at the equations on the screen, mentally tracing the paths they would need to follow. "I'd need to understand your current implementation first, then maybe 3 days, maybe longer." "You have 48 hours, Director Howard said. It wasn't a request." Before Ellie could protest, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Lieutenant Chen was immediately on her feet, hand going to the sidearm Ellie hadn't noticed until now. "What's happening?" Director Howard demanded. A voice came over the intercom. "Eagle Squadron incoming for emergency landing." "Repeat, Eagle Squadron incoming for emergency landing." The tension in the room shifted. Whatever Eagle Squadron was, it clearly meant something important to everyone except Ellie. "The test pilots," Dr. Patel explained, seeing Ellie's confusion. "They were running a modified simulation over the Bering Sea." They hurried back to the main floor where the atmosphere had changed entirely. Monitors showed radar images of 4 aircraft approaching the island. Military personnel rushed to stations, coordinating the incoming planes. Are they in trouble? Ellie asked, watching the tense faces around her. They're running the old communication systems in parallel with a scaled-back version of Nightfall, Lieutenant Chen explained. Standard procedure after the earlier incidents. Through the facility's speakers, they could hear radio communications from the approaching aircraft. Tower, this is Eagle 1. Nightfall systems showing instability again. Permission to land and reset. Eagle 1, you are cleared for priority landing. Medical standing by as precaution. Ellie felt a chill run through her. These pilots were testing her theories right now. Theories that weren't working correctly. Theories that could get them killed. I need to see everything, she said to Dr. Patel with sudden determination. All your development notes, all your test data. If there's a fundamental flaw, we need to find it before anyone else gets hurt. Director Howard studied her face, then nodded to Dr. Patel. Give her full access. Priority clearance. The pilots, Ellie asked. Will I meet them? They'll be debriefed here after landing. Lieutenant Chen confirmed. Eagle Squadron is the elite unit testing Nightfall integration. They know the system better than anyone except the development team. A new voice broke in over the facility speakers, calm but with an undercurrent of tension. Tower Eagle 3, I'm showing cascade failures in navigation. Switching to manual backup. Dr. Patel gripped Ellie's arm. That's what happens right before the system crashes completely. On the large wall screens, one of the radar blips representing the fighter jets began to move erratically. As Ellie watched the drama unfold, the full weight of her situation hit her. She wasn't just a passenger in seat 12F anymore. She wasn't just a physics professor with interesting theories, she was Nightfall. And right now, Nightfall was failing in the sky above them. Ellie watched the screens as Eagle Squadron made their approach to the runway. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Each time a plane landed safely, a collective breath was released. Eagle 3, the jet experiencing the worst system failures, came in last, touching down hard but intact. They're all down, Lieutenant Chen announced, the relief evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. Maintenance crews are securing the aircraft. Pilots will debrief in 20 minutes. Dr. Patel was already pulling up flight data on her screens. The failure pattern is consistent with previous incidents. We're seeing quantum destabilization at precisely the same point in the communication cycle. Ellie moved closer to the displays, her tired eyes scanning the complex readouts. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours now, but adrenaline kept her mind sharp. Something about the data patterns looked familiar, hauntingly so. Can you show me the original equations again? She asked. Not your modified versions. My original paper. A few keystrokes later, and there they were. Equations she'd written a decade ago on a university chalkboard, photographed by someone without her knowledge and apparently sent straight to the Department of Defense. There, she said, pointing to a section of variables. When I wrote this, it was theoretical. I never expected anyone to actually build it. She glanced at Dr. Patel. You've been treating the quantum entanglement as if it were a traditional communication system, trying to strengthen the signal, increase the bandwidth, but that's not how entanglement works. Before she could explain further, the door to the main chamber opened. 4 pilots in flight suits entered, their faces drawn with fatigue. They moved with the particular confidence of people accustomed to danger, but Ellie could see the tension in their shoulders. The lead pilot, a tall woman with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes, scanned the room until her gaze landed on Ellie. You must be Nightfall, she said, walking directly toward her. Ellie blinked in confusion. I'm Dr. Eleanor Reeves, codename Nightfall, Director Howard clarified. Captain Reynolds, this is the physicist who developed the theoretical foundation for the system. Captain Reynolds stared at Ellie with a mixture of surprise and something that looked oddly like respect. You're younger than I expected. She extended her hand. Captain Alexis Reynolds, Eagle 1. Ellie shook the offered hand, still uncomfortable with this Nightfall business. I'm sorry about the system failures. I never intended... No apologies needed, Captain Reynolds interrupted. We knew the risks when we signed up for the program. But I'll be honest with you, Doctor. We're running out of workarounds. Today was too close for comfort. One of the other pilots stepped forward, a man with a fresh bruise forming on his temple. Eagle 3, your system tried to put me into the ocean today. Lieutenant Chen intervened smoothly. We've brought Dr. Reeves in to solve the instability issues. She's identified a potential flaw in our approach. The pilots exchanged glances. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. How long? 48 hours is what we've given her, Director Howard said. Make it 36, the bruised pilot replied grimly. Intel says our friends across the Pacific are running their own tests tomorrow. If they succeed, the implication hung in the air. America needed to solve this problem first, or risk falling behind in a technology race with massive strategic implications. I'll need everything you can tell me about the in-flight experience, Ellie said, addressing the pilots directly. What happens right before the system fails? What does it feel like? For the next hour, Ellie sat with the Eagle Squadron pilots listening to their descriptions of the system failures. Unlike the engineers who saw only data, the pilots felt the failures physically. The momentary disorientation, the strange sensation they described as reality flickering, the brief but terrifying loss of control. It's like being in two places at once, Captain Reynolds explained, frustration evident in her voice. Like part of me is still flying the jet, but another part is somewhere else. That description sent a chill up Ellie's spine. It matched exactly what her original theories had predicted might happen if quantum entanglement was pushed too far. The human mind wasn't meant to process reality that way. As the debriefing concluded, Ellie noticed how the military personnel deferred to her, how conversations paused when she spoke. It was disconcerting. Yesterday she'd been just another academic struggling for grant money and recognition. Today, elite fighter pilots were looking at her like she held their lives in her hands, which she supposed she did. I need a lab space, she told Dr. Patel. And coffee. Lots of coffee. They set her up in a small room adjacent to the main chamber, equipped with powerful computers and access to all the project data. For hours, she pored over the development history, the test results, the modifications made to her original work. The more she saw, the clearer the problem became. Her original paper had proposed a delicate balance, a limited form of quantum entanglement that could transmit information instantaneously across vast distances. But the military had wanted more, stronger connections, more data, faster transmission. They'd pushed the technology far beyond what her equations had been designed to handle. Around midnight, Captain Reynolds appeared at her door with a fresh cup of coffee and a sandwich. Thought you might need these. Ellie accepted both gratefully. Thanks. I think I'm starting to understand what went wrong. The pilot pulled up a chair. Mind explaining it to someone who barely passed physics? Ellie smiled despite her exhaustion. You know how entangled particles mirror each other no matter how far apart they are? That's the basis of the whole system, right? The comm units in our jets are entangled with the ones here on the base. Exactly. But the military wanted to entangle too many particles, create too many connections. It's like... Ellie searched for an analogy. It's like trying to have a conversation with 50 people all talking at once. Eventually, your brain can't process it anymore. Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. And when we're pulling high-G maneuvers, adding combat stress, the system gets overwhelmed. The quantum state becomes unstable. Can you fix it? Ellie stared at her equations, mind racing. Maybe, not by making it stronger, though. We need to make it more flexible, more human. Through the night, Ellie worked. Occasionally, military personnel would pass by her door, glancing in with curious expressions. Word had spread through the base about the civilian from Seat 12F, who turned out to be the creator of their most classified project. By dawn, she had a theoretical solution, a fundamental redesign that would require gutting much of the system they'd built, but might actually work. As she explained her findings to Dr. Patel and the engineering team, she could see the resistance in their faces. 10 years of work would need to be reconsidered, billions of dollars essentially written off. This can't be right, one engineer protested. We've followed established quantum principles throughout development. That's the problem, Ellie insisted. Quantum entanglement doesn't follow established principles. That's what makes it quantum. The debate grew heated, voices raised. The engineering team, defending years of work, versus one civilian professor who'd appeared out of nowhere. The door swung open, and Captain Reynolds entered with the rest of Eagle Squadron behind her. The room fell silent. We're scheduled for another test flight in 6 hours, she announced. I need to know if we're flying with the same system that nearly killed Eagle 3 yesterday, or if we're trying something new. All eyes turned to Ellie. In that moment, she wasn't just a physics professor anymore. She wasn't just the accidental creator of Project Nightfall. She was the only person who might be able to keep those pilots alive. "Give me 4 hours," she said. "I think I can prove my theory is correct." 4 hours wasn't nearly enough time to redesign a system that had taken a decade to build, but Ellie had no choice. As the engineering team reluctantly gathered around her workstation, she pulled up a simplified model of her solution. "The fundamental problem is that you've been trying to strengthen the quantum connections," she explained, pointing to the complex web of entangled particles on her screen. "More connections, more stable links, more data. But quantum entanglement doesn't work that way." Dr. Patel frowned. "We've achieved remarkable stability in controlled conditions." "Exactly, in controlled conditions," Ellie countered. "But put those same systems in a fighter jet pulling 6 Gs in a combat maneuver, and suddenly your controlled conditions are anything but." She brought up footage from the cockpit cameras during yesterday's test flight. The moment of system failure was visible in the pilot's reaction, the sudden disorientation, the frantic adjustments to regain control. "What we need isn't stronger connections," Ellie continued. "We need controlled instability. We need to let the quantum field breathe," one of the engineers scoffed. "Let it breathe? This isn't yoga, Dr. Reeves. This is quantum physics." Ellie didn't back down. "And quantum physics isn't classical physics. Uncertainty isn't a bug, it's a feature. We need to build that uncertainty into the system." For the next 3 hours, Ellie led them through her redesign. Instead of forcing the quantum particles to maintain rigid connections, her approach embraced their natural tendency to fluctuate. The system would anticipate disruptions rather than fighting against them, creating pathways for the quantum field to resolve itself even under extreme stress. When she finished explaining, the room was quiet. Dr. Patel was the first to speak. "It's completely counterintuitive," she said slowly, "but it might work." "It will mean rewriting significant portions of the system," another engineer pointed out. Ellie checked the time. "We don't need to rewrite everything yet, just enough to test the core concept in one jet." Director Howard, who had been silently observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "How confident are you, Dr. Reeves?" Ellie met his gaze. "Confident enough to bet my career on it. Not confident enough to bet someone else's life." "That decision isn't yours to make," came a voice from the doorway. Captain Reynolds stood there, already dressed in her flight suit. "Eagle Squadron flies the test. That's our job." Director Howard turned to Dr. Patel. "Can you implement Dr. Reeves's modifications in time for the scheduled test flight?" The engineer looked uncertain. "A partial implementation, maybe. Just the core framework of her approach. It would be experimental at best." "Do it," Howard ordered. "Captain Reynolds will delay your flight by 2 hours to give the team time to make these changes." As the engineers scrambled to implement her design, Ellie felt the weight of responsibility settling over her. These weren't just abstract equations anymore. Real people would be testing her theories, risking their lives based on her assurances. Captain Reynolds must have noticed her expression. "Having second thoughts, Doctor?" Ellie shook her head. "Just wishing I had more time." "Welcome to military research," the pilot replied with a tight smile. "We never have enough time." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Ellie worked alongside the engineering team, translating her theoretical approach into practical code. They argued, compromised, and finally reached a working model that could be uploaded to the F-22 systems. When it was time for the test flight, everyone moved to the main control room. 4 jets would fly, but only Eagle 1, Captain Reynolds' aircraft, would carry the modified system. The other 3 would use the standard version but stay well back in case of catastrophic failure. Ellie watched as the pilots went through their pre-flight checks. Captain Reynolds caught her eye and gave a small nod before pulling on her helmet. A strange sort of trust had formed between them. The theoretical physicist and the test pilot, both women in male-dominated fields, both carrying the weight of Project Nightfall on their shoulders. "Eagle Squadron cleared for takeoff," announced the control tower. "Weather conditions optimal. Test parameters unchanged from yesterday's flight." One by one, the jets roared down the runway and lifted into the clear Alaskan sky. On the large screens in the control room, Ellie could see the view from Captain Reynolds' cockpit as well as the real-time data from the Nightfall system. "Beginning standard flight pattern," Captain Reynolds reported. her voice calm and professional over the radio. All systems nominal. For 20 minutes, the jets performed basic maneuvers, nothing that would stress the quantum communication system. Everything functioned perfectly, just as it had in previous tests before the problems began. Proceeding to Phase 2, Captain Reynolds announced, commencing high-stress maneuvers. This was the moment of truth. In previous tests, the system had begun to fail during sharp turns, rapid acceleration, and other demanding flight patterns. Ellie held her breath as Eagle 1 banked sharply and climbed almost vertically into the sky. The data readouts flickered, showing stress on the quantum connections. But unlike before, the system didn't try to force stability. Instead, following Ellie's redesign, it allowed the quantum field to fluctuate within controlled parameters. Experiencing minor comm lag, Captain Reynolds reported. But maintaining connection. System is adapting. Ellie leaned forward, watching the numbers with intensity. This was exactly what she'd hoped would happen. The quantum entanglement wasn't fighting the stress, it was working with it. Proceeding to Phase 3, came the pilot's voice. Maximum stress test. What followed was a series of maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. The F-22 twisted, rolled, and changed direction with incredible speed and precision. On the data screens, the quantum field fluctuated wildly, but never collapsed. The connection remained intact. Nightfall is holding, Captain Reynolds reported, a note of surprise in her voice. Repeat, Nightfall is holding under maximum stress. A cheer went up in the control room. Engineers patted Ellie on the back. Dr. Patel shook her head in disbelief. It's working, she said. It's actually working, but Ellie wasn't celebrating yet. Let's see if it holds through the landing sequence. That's another high-stress point. They watched as Eagle Squadron completed their test patterns and began the approach back to the base. The modified system in Eagle 1 continued to perform flawlessly, adapting to each change in flight conditions. As the jets taxied to a stop on the runway, Ellie finally allowed herself to breathe normally again. Captain Reynolds had proven her theory correct. The counterintuitive approach, embracing instability rather than fighting it, had worked. The pilots were barely out of their aircraft when Director Howard approached Ellie. Congratulations. Dr. Reeves, it seems Nightfall lives up to its reputation. Nightfall is the system. Not me, she corrected him. He shook his head. You misunderstand. Nightfall has always been the code name for the creator of the system, you. The project itself is called Quantum Leap. Before Ellie could process this revelation, Captain Reynolds strode into the control room, still in her flight suit, helmet tucked under her arm. Whatever you did, Doctor, it worked, she announced loud enough for everyone to hear. The system responded differently, like it was anticipating problems before they happened. The other pilots followed, their expressions a mixture of relief and newfound respect. The pilot who had nearly crashed the day before gave Ellie a small salute. So what now? Ellie asked, looking at Director Howard. I've fulfilled my part of the bargain. Can I go home? He exchanged glances with Lieutenant Chen. There's still work to be done. Your temporary solution needs to be implemented across the entire fleet. And there's the matter of the Chinese test tomorrow. Ellie felt exhaustion washing over her. She'd been awake for nearly 2 days straight, running on coffee and adrenaline, but looking at the faces around her. The pilots who risked their lives, the engineers who'd worked alongside her. She knew she couldn't walk away yet. I'll need a proper lab, she said. And a team that's willing to throw out the old rulebook. Director Howard nodded. Whatever you need, Dr. Reeves, or should I say Nightfall. For the first time since landing on this remote island, Ellie felt a strange sort of acceptance. She'd never asked to be Nightfall, never wanted a code name or a classified project. But now that she was here, now that she understood what was at stake, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Just call me Ellie, she said. We have work to do.